The morning they asked the last daughter in the county to consider the Duke of Ashford, she was standing in the kitchen garden with her hands in the dirt. She did not hear the bell. She had learned, some years since, to be conveniently unhearing when the bell rang in the late morning, because the late morning was when her aunt received callers, and her aunt's callers had a way of looking at Maren Voss the way one looks at furniture that has been left in a room too long, noting it, finding it unchanged, and looking away again. The bell rang a second time. She pressed a cutting deeper into the bed, patted the earth firm, and stayed where she was. She did not yet know that the letter sitting on the silver tray in the hall would determine the course of the next 6 months of her life, and perhaps every month after. Had she known, she would have gone in sooner. She would have gone in with clean hands. Her aunt came to the garden herself, which had not happened since the morning Maren's father died. Theodora Voss was a small woman who moved as though she expected the room to rearrange itself around her. She came down the gravel path with the letter held away from her body, as though it might bite. She stopped at the edge of the beds. She looked at Maren's hands. "You will come inside," she said, "and you will wash those. I have 3 more cuttings." Maren, it was the voice her aunt used when the subject was money. Maren straightened, stripped off her gloves, and went inside. The letter was from the offices of Lord Carver-Dunn, solicitor, acting on behalf of His Grace Aldrich Ravenscroft, the Duke of Ashford, in the matter of a proposed arrangement. The proposed arrangement was a marriage. The terms were, on their face, extraordinarily simple. One respectable woman of good family, no expectations required, to serve as Duchess and to manage the household of Ashford Park, in exchange for the settlement of all outstanding debts against the estate of the late Edmund Voss, and a dowry of £500 to the younger Voss daughters upon their marriage. Maren read it twice. She set it on the table. She looked at the amount specified for her father's debts and did not allow her face to change. "There have been others," her aunt said, folding her hands in her lap, which meant she was nervous. "Before us, I mean. Charlotte Fenwick, the Ashby cousins, 3 of the Moreland girls. None of them would take it. Why not?" Theodora's chin lifted a fraction. "He is said to be difficult, cold. There was a first marriage. The circumstances were unhappy. A pause, carefully managed. He does not go to London. He is not liked, I see." "Maren, how long ago did the debts pass to the solicitor?" Her aunt was quiet for a moment. "The spring after your father died." "Which was 3 years. 3 years of Theodora managing the amount by which it grew. Of careful silences on the subject of where the housekeeping money came from. Of Maren's sisters being kept in new ribbons and dancing lessons, while Maren wore the same 3 gowns to the same 3 assemblies and pretended she did not notice the whispers. She had noticed. She was very good at noticing things people believed she was too plain and too quiet to observe. "I will go to Ashford Park," she said. "I will speak to the Duke. If I do not find the terms acceptable, I will say so honestly, and that will be the end of it." "And if you do find them acceptable?" Maren picked up the letter. "Then I will have read him correctly, and there will be one more thing I cannot yet tell you, but I will tell you when I can." She folded the letter along its crease, "Write back, and say I will come on Wednesday." The carriage, borrowed, horse hired, Theodora's second-best traveling cloak pressed and sponged, arrived at Ashford Park in the last thin light of an October afternoon, which was not a kind time for first impressions. The house was large and stone-gray and older than its century, with gardens that had clearly once been extraordinary and were now somewhere between very tired and very angry about it. Maren looked at the gardens from the window and thought, "There is money enough for the house to stand, and none at all for the parts that grow. The butler, Aldous, she would learn, 40 years in the house, with a voice like a door that needed oiling, led her to a room that had been recently warmed and recently aired, and had the feeling of a room that forgot both states almost immediately upon achieving them. A tray arrived. The china was genuine. The tray was dented. She cataloged these details the way she cataloged everything, without emphasis, without sentiment, filing them where they might later be useful. The Duke of Ashfern came in at 20 minutes past the hour, which was 40 minutes after she had been told to expect him. She had time to observe him before he reached the center of the room, and she used it. He was taller than the door seemed built to accommodate, which was perhaps why he moved with that slight forward angle, as though perpetually ducking something only he could see. His hands were wrong for a duke, broad, with the kind of knuckles that come from actual work, a scar across the left one that was too straight to be accidental. His face was composed in the way of a man who had decided expression was a resource to be conserved. Grief in the set of the jaw, not recent grief, old grief, worn smooth. He stopped at the appropriate distance. He looked at her, not in the manner of men at assemblies, which was a species of inventory, but in the manner of a person who is genuinely attempting to determine something specific. "Miss Voss," he said. His voice was quiet. She had expected that from what her aunt had described, but the quality of it surprised her. It was not cold. It was controlled. There was a difference. "Your Grace," she said. "I am told you read the terms." "I did, and you had no objection sufficient to prevent your coming." "I had several objections. I wished to see if they were the right size before I raised them." Something in the arrangement of his face shifted very slightly. Not a smile, an acknowledgement. "Sit down then," he said, "and raise them." She sat. She folded her hands in her lap, not in the nervous manner of her aunt, but in the deliberate manner of a woman settling herself at a desk. "The terms address the debts and my sister's portions. They do not address what is expected of me beyond the management of the household. That would be the sum of it. Then the terms are incomplete." A beat of silence. He had seated himself across from her, and he did not fill the silence with comfort, which she found she preferred. "Explain what you mean." "I mean that I will not enter an arrangement whose limits are unspoken. I have seen what happens to women who accept unspoken limits. The limit always expands when the party who benefits from its expansion is not the woman." She looked at him steadily. "So I am asking plainly, are there children?" "One son. 8 years old. He is at school. Do you expect me to manage his care and education, or only the house?" "His care," he said after a moment. "Yes. Are there debts beyond those itemized in the solicitor's letter?" Something moved through his face that was not quite surprise and not quite respect. He named a figure. She had been trained by 3 years of quiet arithmetic to absorb financial information without flinching, and she absorbed it now, sorted it, and filed it. "Is there anything in the household accounts that would explain why 4 housekeepers have left in the past 2 years?" The silence this time was different in texture. "Where did you hear that?" "I didn't hear it. I inferred it from the condition of the garden, the state of the tray, the temperature of the room, and the fact that you told me you expected me to manage the household without first telling me that 3 other women declined your offer. 1 would not leave a thriving household in that condition. 4 would not leave without cause." She paused. "I am asking what the cause is. You may tell me, or you may not, but if you do not, I will be forced to assume the cause is you." The Duke studied her for a long moment. He had the hands, she noticed again, of a man who worked. He pressed them flat to his thighs, once, then stilled them. My late wife's cousin, he said, is the steward of Ashfern. He has been the steward for 12 years. He is efficient, and the estate depends on him, and he does not, another pause, of a kind she could not quite decode yet. The women who have managed this house have found him, he stopped. Difficult, she said. Yes, more difficult than you? He looked at her. For the first time, she thought, with genuine attention. Yes, he said, more difficult than me. All right, she said. I will take the position. I have one condition of my own, which is that I will keep my own accounts for the household and report them to you directly, not through the steward. If you find that unacceptable, I will go home on Thursday and we need not mention it again. It is not unacceptable, he said. He sounded slightly as though he had not expected to say that. Wednesday. You said you could begin on Wednesday. I said I would come on Wednesday to speak to you. I can begin on Friday. His expression did not change. But he held out his hand, and she shook it, and the arrangement was made with the same ceremony one uses to close a business transaction, because they had both agreed, without saying so, that it was precisely that, a business transaction, and neither of them needed it to be more. She was 27 years old. She had been called plain so often, she had stopped hearing it, and she had just agreed to marry the man no one in 3 counties would have. She did not sleep well on the journey home. She did not sleep badly either. She was too busy thinking about the accounts. The wedding was quiet at the parish church on the first Friday in November, with her aunt and sisters in the front pew, and Aldous from Ashfern, and a solicitor as witnesses. The vicar was brisk and kind, and clearly operating on the belief that neither party required extended ceremony. He was right. The Duke said his words in that composed, quiet voice. Marin said hers in hers. There was no ring. There had not been one mentioned in the terms. She was almost at the church door before his hand appeared at her elbow, holding a ring in a small box, a plain band of old gold with garnets set into it on either side of a pearl. She looked at it. It was my mother's, he said, not my wife's. If you would rather not, I would rather, she said, and put out her hand. It fit. She was not certain what to do with that information, so she filed it away with everything else. The staff of Ashfern received her with the careful, watchful neutrality of people who have been disappointed before. She counted 11 faces at the introductions and learned all 11 names in the same afternoon, which she could see impressed them, and which she had done precisely because it would. She was very clear-eyed about the tools available to her. The exception was the steward, who came to the introductions last and looked at her with a pleasantness so smooth it was like glass. His name was Fenwick Rain. His mother had been a Ravenscroft, and he wore the connection in the set of his shoulders, in the casual ownership with which he moved through a house that was not his. He was handsome in the specific way that announces itself, rather than simply being, the sort of handsomeness that has always been acknowledged and has grown comfortable expecting acknowledgement. Mrs. Ravenscroft, he said, with a slight, correct bow. I hope you will find Ashfern comfortable. I expect to find it in need of work, she said pleasantly. I look forward to reviewing the household accounts. Of course, smooth as glass. I will arrange for them to be sent to you. I will come to you for them, she said. Tomorrow morning, before 11. He smiled. It was a very correct smile. She looked at his hands. He was holding a pair of work gloves in his right, tapping them in a slow, methodical rhythm against his thigh, and filed the rhythm away. The household accounts, when she saw them the following morning, were immaculate. They were so immaculate that she sat with them for an hour and a half and then spent the afternoon walking every room of Ashfern Park from the attic to the cellar, counting what was there and what was not, and what the accounts said should be both. She returned to the steward's office and stood in the doorway and said, "The linen inventory shows 48 sets. I count 31. Rain looked up from his desk. The gloves were in his hand again, tapping. "Linen wears out," he said. 48 sets were recorded as purchased 14 months ago, she said. New linen does not wear out in 14 months, to the point where 17 sets are unaccounted for. Perhaps you miscounted. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "I do not miscount," she said, and went to find her husband. He was in the stables. She had been told he was often there, and she stood at the stable door and said, without preamble, "Your steward is selling the household inventory." The Duke did not look up from what he was doing, which was checking a horse's near foreleg with the efficiency of a man who has done it 10,000 times. "What did you find?" "Linen, to begin. 17 sets unaccounted for, purchased 14 months ago. The household accounts are clean, but the physical inventory does not match them. I have not yet checked the silver." She paused. "How long have you suspected?" He set the horse's leg down gently and straightened. He was wearing no coat and no cravat, and had the look of a man who had been awake since before the light. "Since last spring," he said. "I could not find the gap. You had no one keeping their own accounts to cross-reference. No, you should have told me." He looked at her, not defensively, with a kind of careful steadiness, as though steadiness were a thing he practiced. "I did not want to lead you to a conclusion before you reached it yourself," he said. "I wanted to know if you would find it." She considered that for a long moment. It was, she thought, a strange and particular form of trust. "I found it," she said. "Give me 2 weeks." She did not tell him what she needed the 2 weeks for, which was its own kind of trust, returned. The house woke up in November, the way old houses do, grudgingly, with cold mornings and the smell of wood smoke always somewhere 2 rooms ahead of you. Marin learned it room by room. She learned the windows that stuck, and the floorboard in the east gallery that announced visitors better than any bell, and the way the light moved through the library in the late afternoon, going gold and then amber, and then a particular dark copper that made the books look like they were about to say something. She spent 2 evenings in the library, not reading but talking, or rather, listening, which she was better at than talking, while the Duke told her about the estate in the careful, economic manner of a man who is unused to being asked. He had come in on the second evening unannounced, stopped when he saw her at his desk, and then sat down across from her without being invited, which was the first time he had done anything without being invited. She was reviewing the kitchen accounts. He watched her for a while. "You do not use a cipher," he said. "For your notes." "No, I use my own hand. No one can read it but me." She did not look up. "Including stewards." A pause. "Is it legible to you?" "Perfectly," she turned a page. "How many years did your mother use this desk?" He was quiet for a moment. She looked up then, because the quality of the silence had changed. He was looking at the desk rather than at her, and his hands were flat on his thighs in that manner she had noticed at their first meeting. 30 years, he said. "She died when I was 12. I am sorry." She was. He stopped. Began again. She knew every name in the house, the way you knew them on the first afternoon. Marin looked at him carefully. "You noticed that." "I notice most things," he said. "I am usually better at appearing not to." She almost smiled. She did not, quite, but she felt the shape of it in her face. "It was her ring," she said. "Yes, she would have wanted it used, I think. Rings are for using." He looked at her hands. She was not wearing it while she worked. She had laid it on the desk beside the accounts, and he reached out and set it back beside her without speaking, which was, she thought, a sentence. She picked it up and put it on. December arrived with hard frost and a letter from Aldrich's son at school. A careful, slightly stiff letter in the handwriting of a child who has been told his penmanship reflects on his father. His name was Tobias. He was learning Latin and hated it with a precision his letter made very clear. He wanted to know if there were still horses. "Write back and tell him about the horses," Marin said. "He will ask to come home for Christmas," Aldrich said, using her given name for the first time without seeming to notice he had done it. "Then he may come home for Christmas." She set the letter down. "He has a mother's room with nothing in it, and a father who is here, and Latin that is going badly. He should be home. The house has not been." He stopped. "Comfortable," he said, "for children. Then we will make it comfortable." She looked at him. "That is what I am here to do." He looked at her for a long moment in which something behind his face shifted, slow and careful, like ice deciding whether to hold. He said nothing. He went back to the letter, but that evening, when she came down from the east wing where she had been taking inventory, she found that someone had lit every lamp in the long gallery. She stood in the doorway of the gallery and looked at all those lit lamps and did not let her face do anything at all. But she stood there for rather a long time. Fenwick Rain was at his best in company, which meant he was at his most dangerous in it. He had the kind of social grace that functions as currency. He could make anyone in a room feel the warmth of his attention and the chill of its withdrawal within the same conversation, and he spent both freely, and the household ran on the result. The maids were attentive when he was near. The footmen were sharp. Marin watched all of this and said nothing and kept her own records. On the third Thursday of December, she found the first document. She was in the cellars checking the wine inventory against the accounts, a job that Aldous informed her no mistress of Ashfern had performed in living memory, and which she performed for exactly that reason when she found, tucked behind the third rack on the left side, a letter. It had been there long enough to be dusty. It was addressed to Fenwick Rain in a hand she did not recognize, and it was from a wine merchant in the neighboring town, and it was a receipt, not for wine delivered to Ashfern, but for wine delivered on behalf of Ashfern to another address. She put it in her pocket. She said nothing. 2 days later, she found a second letter, this one in the stable loft, in a cigar box under a loose board. The box contained 5 letters, all from the same merchant, all receipts. The total, over 4 years, was significant. She sat in the loft with the letters spread before her, in the cold, in the thin gray December light, and did the arithmetic in her head. And then did it again, because the first answer seemed excessive. The second answer was the same. She heard a step on the ladder. She folded the letters into her pocket before she turned. It was Aldrich, not Rain. She could tell by the footfall, which she had learned in 2 months, without meaning to, and when his head appeared at the loft opening, he looked at her, and then at the empty floor where the letters had been, and did not ask. "You found something," he said. "Yes. Is it enough?" She thought about the linen and the silver and the receipts. "Nearly. I need one more thing." She looked at him. "I need to know what is in the locked room on the second floor of the east wing." He was very still. "I was not going to ask," she said, "because I thought it was not my business. But I think now it may be relevant." "It was my wife's room," he said. "I have not opened it since she died." "I think Rain has," she said. "I think he has been using it as a second office." He came up into the loft and sat down on a hay bale across from her, which was not a ducal thing to do, and looked at his hands. The scar on the left one caught the light. "How long ago did she die?" she asked. 4 years. 4 years was the beginning date of the receipts. She did not say this yet. She was ill for a long time before that, he said. He was speaking to his hands, not to her, which was how he spoke about things that cost him. Rain managed the estate during that period. I was not able to manage it myself. I was grateful to him. He stopped. I trusted him further than I should have. She sat very quietly and did not fill the silence. She did not trust him, he said. She said so. I did not. I chose not to listen. He looked up at her then, and she saw what was in his face, and it was not anger, and it was not grief alone. It was the specific weight of a man who has been carrying an error he cannot undo. That is the thing I have not been able to say to anyone. That she told me, and I did not listen. Maren thought about what to do with this for a long moment. She said, "You listened to me. The accounts." He looked at her. "You could have told Rain I was keeping my own accounts and given him warning. You didn't. That was a choice." She met his eyes. People learn to listen again. It costs them something, but they learn. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that was very controlled and very quiet, "She had a letter near the end. She would not tell me what was in it. She said she was keeping it she called it for the light, meaning when everything came clear. She never told me where she had put it." Maren thought about the locked room. She said, "Give me the key." He reached into his coat pocket and set a small iron key on the hay bale between them. He had been carrying it, she realized, for 4 years. She picked it up without comment and put it in her pocket beside the receipts. The room was cold. It was cold in the specific way of rooms that have been sealed against grief rather than against weather. She stood in the doorway for a moment and let her eyes adjust, and then went to the desk. She found the letter in the third drawer, in an envelope sealed and addressed in a clear, firm hand. The address was her husband's name, and below it, in smaller letters, a single phrase, "When it is time." She did not open it. She came back to the loft and set it on the hay bale in front of him and stepped back. He looked at it for a long moment. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. "Not today," he said. "No," she agreed. But soon, she stood up. "I need until the new year, I think. And then I will need you to invite your solicitor, and I think perhaps also the Reverend Marsh, because he knew your wife, and I think he will be a useful witness." He looked at her. "You have a plan. I have the outline of one. There is a thing I cannot yet lay before you. But I will, when I have it whole." "All right," he said, in the quiet voice, and looked again at the envelope. "All right." They came down from the loft together, side by side, into the December cold. Tobias came home for Christmas on the 22nd of December, and he was 8 years old and dark-haired and suspicious of everything, which Maren recognized as a reasonable response to his history, and she treated it as such. She did not fuss. She did not perform warmth. She asked him what breed he thought the bay mare in the far stable was, and he told her, correctly, and they had a discussion about horses that lasted 40 minutes, at the end of which he had forgotten to be suspicious, and she had learned that he was very bright and very lonely, and missed his father in the specific way of a child who has decided missing is embarrassing. She mentioned none of this to Aldrich directly. She only ensured, when she arranged the next morning's schedule, that there was an hour before noon when both of them were in the stables at the same time, with no particular agenda. She could hear them through the stable window. She was not listening, exactly. She was standing in the kitchen garden, checking on the winter beds, which were in earshot of the stables. The distinction seemed important. What she heard was a long silence, and then a question from Tobias about the Latin, and then her husband's voice, low and steady, and then something that might have been a laugh, a boy's laugh, surprised out of him, and then the low voice again. and she turned back to the winter beds and pressed her hands into the cold earth and stayed very still until she was sure her face had arranged itself properly. The 28th of December brought a caller she had not anticipated, a woman named Cecily Thornmere, polished and cool and clearly well acquainted with Ashfern Park, who arrived in a curricle and asked to see the Duke, and, finding Marin first, chose to see her instead with the air of a woman accepting a lesser venue graciously. "I had not heard," she said, looking at Marin over the tea things with a bright, smooth curiosity, "that Aldrich had. That is, I knew of course that there had been a—" she smiled. "How are you finding Ashfern?" "Full of interest," Marin said. "It is a wonderful house. I have always thought so." A pause. "I was a great friend of his first wife, you know, Elspeth. We were very close." "I believe you were," Marin said, pleasantly. "I believe she felt so too." Something crossed Cecily Thornmere's face, very quickly. "You have heard about her then, a little. She seems to have been a woman of considerable perception." A longer pause. "She was ill for a long time." "Yes," Marin set down her cup. "A great deal can happen when someone is ill for a long time. Things that perhaps she noticed, being confined, that the household did not notice otherwise." Cecily Thornmere looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not entirely what it had been when she walked in. "Fenwick is very capable," she said, carefully. "He has kept Ashfern running single-handed for years." "He has been very busy, certainly," Marin agreed. "Will you stay for dinner? My husband will be sorry to have missed you." She did not stay for dinner. But after she left, Marin sat for a full quarter-hour and thought about the shape of what she had just heard, and turned it over, and pressed it against what she already knew, and found that it fit. The last day of December, she finally counted the silver. What she found there was enough to close the case, had she been building a case, which she was. The silver that was missing, that the accounts listed as sold for estate maintenance, had not been sold at market price. It had been sold at half market price to a buyer whose name appeared in 3 of the 5 letters from the wine merchant. And the buyer was not unknown to her. She had looked him up in the county records on a Tuesday morning when Aldrich was in the fields, and the name connected to a residence 12 miles east, a residence that had recently, in the past 4 years, undergone considerable improvements. She went to her room. She sat at her desk. She took out the receipts and arranged them in chronological order, and wrote, in her own unreadable hand, a precise accounting of what they proved and what they implied, and what she needed to make them irrefutable. Then she sealed it. Then she sat for a long time looking at the winter window and thinking about a woman named Elspeth, who had been ill for a long time in a locked room, who had found something and kept it for the light. She thought, "She sent me the key." She did not know quite what she meant by that, but she sat with it for a while before she went to bed. The new year came in with snow, which Ashfern wore well. It was a house built for winter, all stone and deep-set windows, and the snow softened the edges of what had been austere and made it merely quiet. Tobias, who had remained home past Christmas with a diplomatic lack of comment from anyone, declared a war upon the south garden that involved fortifications and a trebuchet he designed himself, the engineering of which interested Marin very much and which she improved, on the sly, by adjusting the counterweight. When it worked, he was furious for 20 minutes, and then delighted, and she could hear him explaining the mechanics to his father over supper with the focused intensity of a person who has just learned something magnificent and is still getting over it. She waited. She was not, by nature, a patient woman. This was not something she had ever said aloud, because her life had required her to perform patience so extensively that most people assumed it was her natural state. But she knew the difference, and she felt it now. the contained tension of a plan almost complete. A spring, almost wound. On the 6th of January, she found the second document in the locked room. She had gone back to the room twice since she found the letter, working methodically through the contents the steward had stored there. She had found, behind the panel that stood loose behind the wardrobe, a ledger. It was not a household ledger. It was a private ledger, written in a small, careful hand, and it recorded, date by date, a series of transactions that corresponded almost exactly to the gaps in Ashfurn's household accounts. It was Elspeth's handwriting. She recognized it from the envelope. She sat in the cold room on the floor with the ledger in her hands for a long time. She thought about a woman counting, in secret, from a locked room, watching the estate she loved being emptied around her, and recording every loss in a book she hid behind a wall panel, because she knew what she had found, and she knew what would happen to a woman with an unwelcome truth, and no one who would listen. She set the ledger down gently, the way one sets down something that has been carried a long way. "I heard you," she said, quietly, to the cold room. "I found it. I will take it into the light." She gathered the ledger, the receipts, the accounts, and the letter with its unbroken seal, and she went downstairs. Aldrich was in the library. She came in without knocking, which she had begun to do some weeks ago, and he looked up and saw her face. "Sit down," she said. "I need to tell you everything." She told him everything. She set the receipts on the desk between them, and then the ledger, and watched his face as he read through it, and she did not speak, because he did not need her to speak. He needed her to stay quiet and still, and be in the room while he read his dead wife's handwriting and understood what it meant. He read for a long time. When he was done, he set the ledger down and pressed both hands flat to the desk and looked at the wall. "She found it," he said. "Yes," and he stopped. "She was not. I have no proof that he harmed her," Marin said carefully. "What I have is proof of what he took, and how he hid it, and over how long. That is sufficient." He looked at her. His hands were very still. "You said you needed witnesses, your solicitor, the Reverend, and one more, I think your land agent. He has been here longer than Rain, and I think he suspected. He will be a better witness for being unwilling." "When?" 3 days. I need 3 days to prepare." He reached into his coat and set the sealed envelope on the desk between them, beside the ledger. "For the light," it said. "I think it is time," he said. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. "Not here," she said, "in front of the witnesses." That is what she meant. "Not for you alone, and not for the reckoning alone, for everyone who needs to hear it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You understand her better than I did, and it was not an accusation. It was a man accepting, with a kind of grace that cost him, that there are things we are not always positioned to know about the people closest to us. I understand the particular intelligence of people who are required to be invisible," Marin said. "I have had some practice." He looked at her. The lamp between them was the kind of gold that only comes when it has been cold all day and the night is close. He said, "I know." And something in the way he said it made it the longest sentence in the room. She picked up the ledger, and the receipts, and the letter, and went to prepare. The 3 days were the longest of her time at Ashfurn. She prepared in the mornings, in her own room with the door locked, and managed the house in the afternoons, and appeared at dinner in the evenings as she always did, with the same composed, quiet manner. And she watched Fenwick Rain across the table and thought, "You have been doing this for 4 years, which means you are very good at it, and that means I cannot afford to be anything less than exact." He was easy in his skin, Rain. That was what she had always noticed. the ease, the comfort of a man who has never had to wonder about his own position because he has arranged it too well. He was pleasant at dinner. He talked about the estate in the manner of a man who loves what he oversees. He talked about Elspeth once, only once, in a passing reference to her garden, and his voice when he said her name was perfectly modulated, warm and slightly elegiac and utterly blank. She filed that too. The night before she had intended to move, he came to find her. She was in the east wing, the long gallery, looking at the lit lamps. She had made a habit of it when she heard his step in the corridor, and the difference in it told her something was wrong before he appeared. He was not composed. He was moving with the tight-footed speed of a man who is managing fear and presenting it as purpose. "Mrs. Ravenscroft," he said. "A word, I think." She turned. "Of course. I have been reviewing the household accounts," he said, "as I do each month, and I find that a considerable portion of the inventory records have been," he paused, "constructing, miscopied, I thought you should know, before the solicitor's visit." The solicitor's visit was not, as far as Rain knew, connected to the accounts. She had told no one its purpose. She looked at him and said, gently, "How kind of you to check. There may be some confusion about the numbers. I would not want you, as you are new to the house, I would not want there to be any misapprehension." "I appreciate your thoroughness," she said. "I will certainly review them again before Mr. Dunn arrives." She smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Rain." He looked at her for a moment, measuring. Then he smiled back, and it was a very smooth smile, and he left. She waited until his footsteps faded. Then she went to Aldrich's study and knocked. "Tomorrow," she said, when he opened the door. "Not the day after. He suspects. Are you ready?" She thought about the receipts, the ledger, the letter. She thought about Elspeth in the locked room. She thought about the last 4 years, and about a plain woman in a kitchen garden with her hands in the dirt, who had been told her whole life that the way to survive was to be invisible, and who had decided, on a Wednesday morning in a borrowed cloak, to stop. "Yes," she said. "Send for them now. They can stay the night in the village and come in the morning." He looked at her in the lamplight and said, "If this does not go, it will go," she said. "I have read the room correctly. I do not misread rooms." A pause. Something shifted in his face, the slowness she had learned to watch for, the ice deciding to hold. "No," he said. "You do not." She sent the letters herself. Then she went to bed, and she slept, because she had accounted for everything she could account for, and the rest was the morning's work. The morning came clear and sharp, the kind of cold that makes edges. Mr. Dunn arrived at 9:30 with his clerk. Reverend Marsh came at 10, ruddy-faced and cautious, with the manner of a man who has been summoned to something he does not quite understand, but suspects. The land agent, Horace Brent, 50 years old, with the permanently startled look of a man whose conscience has been troubling him for some time, came at 10:30 and stood in the hall with his hat in his hands and said, to no one in particular, "I thought someone would ask eventually." Marin met them all in the hall and led them to the library. Aldrich was already there. She had arranged the room with care, enough chairs, the lamps lit, the shutters open to the winter light, which was clean and direct and did not allow for ambiguity. She had placed the ledger, the receipts, and the sealed letter on the central table, face down. Rain was sent for. He came in 3 minutes later, smooth and easy, and stopped when he saw the room. She watched his face in the second before he reassembled it, and he counted the people, he saw the table, and he made a decision. The decision was to be confident. It was the right decision for the man he was, and it was going to fail. "Done," he said. Marsh, Brent, his eyes went to Marin. What is this? A reckoning, Aldrich said from the fireplace. Sit down, Fenwick. I can't imagine what. Sit down. He sat. The smooth confidence remained, but it was surface now, and she could see below it. Marin stood at the table. She did not begin with the receipts. She began with the ledger. She opened it and turned it to the first page and said, clearly and steadily, this ledger was kept by Elspeth Ravenscroft over the last 3 years of her life. It records, in her own hand, a series of transactions between this estate and a buyer in Holme Cross, conducted without the Duke's knowledge or authorization. It begins in the autumn of 4 years ago and ends 8 months before her death. She looked at Rain. The buyer's name, which appears throughout, is Cartwright. James Cartwright of Holme Cross, who has resided there for 4 years in considerably improved circumstances. She paused. James Cartwright is your cousin, Mr. Rain. He is also the owner since 4 years ago of a wine merchant's license. You will recognize this. She set the first receipt on the table. Then the second. Then the remaining 3 in chronological order. These are receipts found in a cigar box in the stable loft for wine removed from this estate and sold on its behalf at half market price to your cousin. The total across 4 years is not inconsiderable. Perhaps you would like me to state the figure aloud. Those could have come from anywhere, Rain said. His voice was still controlled. It was, she thought, an impressive performance, and it was going to cost him more for every moment he maintained it. They could not, she said, because they match, date for date, the gaps in Ashfurn's accounts, which match the gaps in Elspeth's ledger, which I will now ask Mr. Dunn to compare. She slid the ledger and the receipts toward the solicitor. Dunn was already reaching for them. These accounts were prepared by me, Rain said, loudly. I prepared them myself, and any gap, yes, she said. You prepared them yourself. That is precisely the point. She looked at Brent. Mr. Brent, you have managed the land accounts at Ashfurn for 22 years. In the past 4 years, have you ever been asked to account for discrepancies between the estate's physical inventory and its written records? Brent turned his hat over in his hands. He did not look at Rain. No, he said. I noticed some. I raised the question once. With Mr. Rain, and what did he say? He said I had miscounted. He said the records were correct. Brent's jaw tightened. I was not in a position. That is, he was very. He told you that you had miscounted, she said. Yes, I have been told the same. She looked at Rain. He relies on that, you see. He is very good at making people doubt their own arithmetic. Rain stood up. Sit down, Aldrich said, very quietly. He had not moved from the fireplace. He had not needed to. Rain sat. Marin took the sealed letter from the table. She held it up. This letter was placed, by Elspeth Ravenscroft, in a locked room in the east wing of this house. It is addressed to her husband. It is sealed. She looked at Aldrich. Your Grace. He came to the table. He took the letter. He broke the seal and unfolded it, and the room was very quiet. Outside, a bird started up somewhere in the winter garden and then stopped. He read for a long time. When he looked up, his face was composed in the way that costs everything. She writes, he said, and his voice did not waver, that she had, over the course of 2 years, found 17 instances of unexplained expenditure, and traced each to a transaction with James Cartwright of Holme Cross. She writes that she confronted Fenwick Rain about the first instance, in private, and that he denied it, and that 3 days later her physician, he stopped. He read the next sentence silently. He read it again. He looked at Rain. Her physician changed her medication, doubled the dose. On Rain's recommendation, the room was very still. Reverend Marsh said, almost to himself. She was lucid at the beginning of her illness. She became less so, Aldrich said, about 6 months after the medication was changed. His voice was quiet and precise and utterly without any quality that could be called forgiveness. She writes that she could not, that she believed if she said anything directly, the medication would be increased again. She writes that she kept the ledger instead. She writes he folded the letter. She writes that she is leaving it for when it can be seen clearly. In the light, with witnesses. He set the letter on the table. Rain's face, when she looked at him, was no longer smooth. The smoothness had gone the way of glass, when pressure becomes too great, not shattered, but cracked, and the cracks were showing. What was underneath was not defiance. It was something older and softer and much worse. He pressed his hands flat to his thighs, the same motion she had watched her husband make that first interview, and she filed the echo away and set it aside, and he said, in a voice that was entirely different from the voice he had been using, she was dying anyway. Yes, Marin said. She was. She did not raise her voice. She was dying. And she was ill, and she was in a locked room, and she used what she had. She was very careful. She was very precise. She paused. She was right. The silence lasted exactly long enough. Mr. Dunn, she said then, quietly. Would you tell us what you find? Dunn had been cross-referencing for the past 10 minutes with his clerk, and he looked up now with the expression of a man who has completed an unpleasant task with thorough results. He stated the amount, he stated the method, he stated the period. He set the ledger and the receipts side by side and said that in his professional opinion, based on 24 years in practice. The evidence was unambiguous. Fenwick, Aldrich said. He had not moved from the table. He looked at his cousin, at the man he had trusted, and who had spent that trust carefully and comprehensively, and he said, very quietly, you will leave Ashfern before the week is out. You will receive 3 months' wages and a letter stating that your tenure ended by mutual agreement. There will be no magistrate. There will be no county scandal. My wife's name will not appear in any account of this that travels beyond this room. He looked at everyone in the room in turn. That is a condition of the mercy, not of the evidence. The evidence needs no conditions. He looked back at Rain. You will repay what you can. Brent will arrange the schedule. You will not be ruined publicly. I am doing this because there are people whose safety requires a quiet resolution, not because you deserve it. Rain sat for a moment in the ruins of his performance. Then, quietly, he said, she trusted you, you know. At the end, she told me. She said she was glad. He looked at his hands. I had forgotten what she said. I had not thought she was glad. His voice was quite stripped of everything now. She was glad you were not alone. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and did not turn. I was envious, he said, of what she had, of what you were. Then he left. The sound of the door closing was very small in the quiet room. Reverend Marsh blew his nose. Brent turned his hat over and over and over. Dunn organized his papers with the focused attention of a man who understands his function precisely. Aldrich stood at the table beside Elspeth's letter and did not look at any of them. Marin poured a glass of water from the decanter and set it beside him and stepped back. He picked it up. He set it down. He said, without looking at her, you said once that people learn to listen again. Yes, I will need. He stopped. Started again. I will need some time. Take it, she said. The house is in order. There is nothing else that needs doing today. He looked at her then. He had the look of a man who has put down a very heavy thing and is not quite sure yet what his hands are for without it. He said, "I owe you an accounting. You do not owe me anything." "I have not said," he stopped. The composure was in place, but it was held. Now, she could see the effort of it, and she thought, he is deciding whether to say it. She did not rush him. "I had not intended," he said finally, carefully, "for this to be other than what we agreed. A business arrangement." "I had not," he paused. "I was not entirely honest, in the terms, about what I was hoping for. I found that I was hoping for more. I did not know how to say so. I do not have." He looked at his hands. "I do not have a great deal of practice in saying the thing that is true when the thing that is true is not about accounts." The winter light came through the open shutters and lay across the table between them, across the ledger and the receipts, and Elspeth's letter and the ring on her left hand. She looked at all of that, and then she looked at him. "Aldrich," she said. He looked up at the sound of his name in her mouth. "I am not asking to be taken in payment for anything. I am not asking to be thanked. I am asking because I wish to know, and I will tell you what I find, and you may do with it what you like." She let the silence sit for a moment. "I find that I look for you when you are not in the room. I find that the first thing I think when I learn something interesting is that I want to tell you. I find that when you first laughed, properly in the library, it was about the trebuchet, and Tobias's engineering, I find that I have thought about it several times since. None of that is in the terms." She met his eyes. "Marry me because you wish it. I will not take any other reason." He looked at her for a long time. "I have wished it," he said, "since the kitchen garden, and before she could answer, you had mud on your wrist when you came to interview me. Just there." He touched his own wrist. "You had not noticed. I thought, she does not conduct herself for show. I thought. I have not met a person like this in a very long time." He came around the table and stopped in front of her, and he was very still, in the way of a man for whom stillness is the only language he fully trusts. "I find that the house is different when you are in it. I find that I have learned to expect you at the desk in the evenings. I find," he stopped, "I find I have a great deal to account for, and you are the only person I want to reckon with." She put out her hand, and he took it, not in the manner of a business arrangement, and neither of them spoke for a while, because the room was very quiet, and the winter light was very clean, and some things do not require words. Reverend Marsh, who had been tactfully examining the books, cleared his throat. "Shall I?" he began. "Yes," Marin said, without turning. "Thank you, Reverend, you may go." He went, very kindly, and Brent followed, and Dunn and his clerk, and the library door closed behind them, and the house settled around them into its winter quiet. Tobias, when told at supper, said, "You are already married." "We are getting married again," Aldrich said, more deliberately. "That seems inefficient," Tobias said. "It does," Marin agreed. "I chose it anyway." He thought about this for a moment. "Will you still fix the trebuchet?" "I already fixed it," she said. "You just haven't found the adjustment yet." He spent the rest of supper in a state of focused suspicion, which was, she thought, the happiest she had seen him. The wedding was in the first week of February, at the parish church with deep snow on the ground, and a weak winter sun that made everything look freshly washed. Aldous wore his best coat and wept with the dedicated efficiency of a man who refuses to acknowledge he is weeping. Tobias stood as witness with a studied solemnity that lasted until the end of the service, at which point he informed his father, quietly but with precision, that he had located the adjustment to the trebuchet and that it was unsporting. Marin's sisters all cried. Her aunt did not, but she held Marin's hands before the service for a long moment and said, She would have liked him, and meant Marin's father, and Marin knew it, and they did not need to say anything else. There was a wedding breakfast afterward at Ashfern, and Aldous served it as though the occasion were a military operation, which it rather was. Brent came and was quietly relieved, and Dunn came and was professionally warm, and Reverend Marsh gave a very short and rather beautiful speech about the mercy that rests in being truly known. Tobias ate a great deal of wedding cake and retired to the stables. In the spring, Fenwick rain settled part of the debt, which was more than anyone expected. He went to the North Coast. There was nothing further to say on the subject. Cecily Thornmere married a perfectly respectable man in the neighboring county and proved, in the event, to be a great deal kinder than her polish suggested. She sent a wedding gift, late, with a note that said simply, she would have been glad, and Marin put the note in the ledger beside Elspeth's letter, because she thought they belonged together. James Cartwright of Homecross sold his wine merchant's license and settled elsewhere. The Ashfern cellars were restocked at proper market price by a different merchant, and the accounts were exact. Tobias came home for good in June, on the grounds that he had already mastered the Latin and the school was not keeping up. He was right on both counts. By August, he was out-arguing his tutor on points of Roman history and had constructed a trebuchet in the south garden that could, in the words of Aldous, throw a cabbage the length of 2 cricket pitches. Aldous said this with the expression of a man who disapproves in principle and has been seen providing the cabbages. The kitchen garden produced, that first summer, more than it had produced in years. Marin had spent the spring laying it out according to a system that was entirely her own and entirely correct, and the result was extravagant, more herbs than the kitchen knew what to do with, roses that climbed the south wall by August, a fig tree that everyone agreed was unlikely, and which thrived with absolute disregard for their doubts. On a morning in late September, almost exactly 1 year from the first time she had stood in that garden with her hands in the dirt and heard the bell she did not answer, she was there again, pressing a cutting into the bed. She heard footsteps on the gravel. She did not look up. "There is a letter from Dunn," Aldrich said, crouching beside her. "Is it urgent?" "No." She pressed the cutting deeper. He handed her the trowel she had set down 3 minutes ago. "You have been in the stables," she said. "You have mud on your coat." "I have been in the stables," he agreed. He was looking at her hands in the dirt. "You had mud on your wrist," he said. "The first day. Just there." She looked up. He was very close, and the morning was very clear, and the garden smelled of rosemary and cold earth and the first faint edge of autumn. She said, "You noticed that." "I noticed everything," he said. From the first, she sat back on her heels and looked at him and thought about a letter in a locked room, and a key carried for 4 years, and a tray with dented edges and genuine china, and 17 sets of linen and accounts that did not match, and a boy asking about horses, and a lamp lit in an empty gallery, and a ring that fit. "Marry me because you wish it," she said. "It was the only reason I would take." He looked at her in the morning light, and the gravity in his face did the thing it always did, not vanishing, exactly, but opening, the way locked rooms open when the right key is found. "I know," he said. "You were right." He took the trowel from her hand, set it down, and did not let go of her hand. "I wish it," he said. "It is the only reason I have." She left the cutting half buried, and the trowel in the dirt, and the letter from Dunn on the hall tray, and the morning came on clear and new around them, and the fig tree, which everyone had said wouldn't take, was covered, improbably, perfectly, in green. If this story found you, and warmed some part of you that needed it, then you know already what it is about, the slow proof of a person the world forgot to look at, and the particular dignity of being seen at last clearly in the light. Pull your chair a little closer. There is room here still, and the fire is kept, and we are not in any hurry. If you would like to stay, and I hope you will stay, then find the subscribe and keep a seat at this hearth, because there are more stories like this one waiting, and they are all worth the telling. Tell me, in the comments, the moment you knew Marin had already won. Was it the accounts, or the key, or something quieter than either? I would like to know what you heard. Until we are back here together, sleep well and be gentle with the ones who counted when no one was watching.